for help.
It's coming up to the second floor. I mean, it's so high up.
But 18 minutes later, no one had arrived.
Dad, we're floating.
Tonight, we investigate the response to the deadly Memorial Day weekend flood.
That was the voice of Laura McComb. The wife and mother was one of 10 people who died after the Blanco River flooded late last month.
It is extremely tough to hear, but we are sharing these newly released 911 calls to look at how first responders reacted that day and whether Hays County was prepared to save those in danger. We have also reached out to the McComb family to let them know we would be airing these calls.
KXAN investigator Robert Maxwell has been looking into what dispatchers and flood victims each were facing.
More than one caller faced the same situation phoning County 911, renting a riverfront house and desperate for a way out that Saturday night.
We are down on the river by the Blanco, and we are at 7A Resort, and we do not know how to get out of here.
Among those out-of-towners, 2 families. Caught off guard, the Blanco River would turn deadly. This call placed at 11:11 p.m.
We're on the Blanco River in Wimberley, and the water is up to the second story into the house.
Okay, what's your address?
100 Deer Crossing.
Deer Crossing?
Deer Crossing.
And what is your name?
Laura, L-A-U-R-A, McComb, M-C-C-O-M-B.
McComb would be among those who first responders would not be able to help in time, despite efforts to knock on some doors earlier that evening. Less than 20 minutes later.
We just saw something going down the river that was flashing a light.
Yes,
and
we do.
Like a house,
Yes,
car, or something.
Okay, yes, we did get reports of house with somebody possibly inside of it. We have reported that to them, okay?
Days later, Hays County's emergency manager admitted many could not rely on preemptive telephone alerts.
That was the part of the challenge because we don't know that the rental property that they're staying at has a landline phone, and utilizing the notification system, it utilizes the 911 database, which means it needs to have a home phone, a landline phone.
Robert Maxwell, KXAN, investigates.
We do know people from out of town who were in that flooded area could still receive emergency alerts as long as the geolocation feature on their phone was turned on. That should have sent the county's call and text notifications to any cell phone in the affected area. The calls also show some flood survivors were in danger long before the National Weather Service issued its most dire warning. Why people were still in their homes or on the road still isn't clear.
Hays County officials say they started alerting people by phone as early as 7:30 the night of the flood. But KXAN investigator Kevin Schwaller found many 911 callers were soon sounding warnings themselves.
Hours before the Blanco River crested at this U.S. Geological Service flood gauge in Wimberley, some flood survivors were calling for help, with only moments to escape. At 11:24, the National Weather Service issued a rare flash flood emergency for this area, including Wimberley. Rewind to 9:41.
The water is rushing completely over the bridge, and it's normally like 15, 20 feet below the bridge.
Okay, are there barricades that you saw?
No, there's no barricades out here.
A man calls about the river's height at the Fisher Store Bridge, which would eventually collapse. This is about 12 miles up the Blanco River before the flood gauge. 9:51, a man reports water reaching a house on stilts here. At 10:02, again by the bridge, a caller reports a couple trapped in a home. Then this call nearby a few minutes later.
We might need to be rescued from a flood. We're in a 2-story house, and the water's up on the second story now.
We spoke with that caller who says she's okay. She was in a home a few down from this damage and says the water was within 8 inches from where she was staying. Between that call and the one where the McComb family was staying, dispatchers got more than a dozen more calls, and the river gauge still had not reached a major flood reading.
Now, some flash flood warnings started much earlier in the afternoon along the river. The Weather Service issued the first flash flood warning for Wimberley at 8:23 p.m. And Robert, we're still working to get the exact timing of the local emergency calls and what exactly they said.
So at what point will the National Weather Service issue one of these flash flood emergencies?
Yeah, these are really for life-threatening situations. It looks at things like stream gauge information, the number of water rescues, and other dangers like the possibility of a dam collapsing. And we don't see these often, and you can see the full explanations of that with this story on KXAN.com.
All right, Kevin, thank you. And Jim, we know the Blanco River hit record levels both in Wimberley and in San Marcos that weekend.
Yeah, Shannon, it wasn't just a record, but it was 7 feet above the previous record high from 1929 there in Blanco, on the Blanco River there in Wimberley before that river gauge broke. Now, how did the river get so high? You're looking at where the rain fell that day and evening, and it couldn't have been more perfectly located to flood the Blanco River. Up in here, the Pedernales River Basin. Just south of here, the Guadalupe River Basin. But the headwaters of the Blanco River are right here, and we saw 10 to as much as 13 inches of rain fall in those headwaters, creating that wall of water that went down into Wimberley. Wimberley actually ended up with only about 3 inches of rain that day.